Hey, hello, Andrew Day and Connor Echols.
Hello, guys. Happy Earthling Day.
Hey guys,
Happy
how's it
Earth.
going?
Let me tell people who I am and what we're doing. I'm Robert Wright. We are collaborators on the Nonzero Newsletter, most recently on the weekend edition of the Nonzero Newsletter, known as the Earthling. And this is an edition of Earthling Unplugged, which is also, like the newsletter, part of the Nonzero Media empire. And what we normally do on this is talk about things that are in the Earthling, which is usually a diverse array of subjects. Sometimes there's a particularly big intersection between what's in the Earthling, what's going on in the world. That is the case today. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Middle East, the expanding war there. Um, Let me just say at the outset, this is Friday afternoon East Coast time. The expectation is that Israel will, within days, if not hours, retaliate for the Iranian missile attack of a couple of days ago, and a lot of other stuff is going on. Now, both of you have been on the podcast. The plan was for us to all be on last week, but Andrew failed to
No
cope
showed.
adequately with a hurricane or something. You were busy being chased out of Asheville, North Carolina, in search of drinkable water, right? And to make matters even more dramatic, you had a newborn. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, like 30 minutes before we were set to tape, our cell service went out all throughout Asheville, and that's how I was gonna tape because I was just gonna use my hotspot because our internet had gone out the morning before. So actually, I was like driving around the city with my cell phone, like looking for a place that had cell service, and quickly realized that no such place existed,
Mhm.
probably in the entire region. And that's when I realized how bad it was because we were kind of weirdly insulated, like our particular house, from the worst effects, even though there was like severe flooding just right down the street.
Mhm.
And when I was driving around on that occasion, that's when I realized there was like trees down.
And how many days
It
old
was it
was
was
your how
chaos.
many days old was your child at this point?
So she was about a week and a half. She
Mhm.
was born September 16th, and this was last week Friday. Yeah.
So that adds a little something to the moment.
It it did, yeah. As a non-zero journalist and staff writer, I can report that the situation in Asheville, North Carolina really, really sucked. It was really tough. Uh, but we were relatively lucky, I would say. We never lost power. No trees fell on our house or on our car. Um, we kind of had gas in the tank. I still had to wait in line for hours to get gas in a canister so we can fill up and escape. And yeah, now we're in South Carolina, so we're all good.
Well, I don't wanna get competitive about this, but we lost power for 4 days during Hurricane Sandy, so, um, Connor, in contrast, has had a very, cosseted life, and, I think has suffered no hardship, but
Of any
he has
sort?
spent a year in Jordan, and speaks Arabic, and that makes him a valuable person to have on hand here as we figure out what's going on in the Middle East. I think we can maybe hold off on talking about what's the lead item in the newsletter this weekend is on the Middle East and uh, it's someone's analysis of why we can expect things to get worse before they get better. Um, but in terms of where we are right now, I don't know. I mean, how where do you guys think we're going to be in a week?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question. Everything's been kind of unpredictable so far. I think, I pulled together a list earlier, and, the places that Israeli Air Force has struck in the last few days include a base in Syria, two places in Yemen, a bunch of different places in Lebanon, Gaza, West Bank. And now we're just getting news that some Iraqi militias have successfully hit some Israeli soldiers within the Golan Heights. So, I think within the next
Mhm.
couple of days, we could absolutely expect more airstrikes in Iraq, some airstrikes potentially even in Iran, which is the big, I guess, question and the main kind of point of escalation. So
Yeah.
everywhere is where I'm expecting
And by
things
the
to
way,
flare
the
up.
U.S. apparently the U.S. just hit the Houthis and expanded its the strikes. You know, Gregory Johnson, maybe one of the leading authorities on the Houthis, tweeted, "This looks like an expansion of U.S. targeting in Yemen," which begs the question, if this expanded targeting doesn't work, what next? So there's a lot going on. And of course, I guess we haven't gotten final word on the success of the Israeli strike last night that was intended to kill the heir apparent to Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, whom they killed, whatever it was, a week or so ago. But I get the sense that they succeeded and maybe even took along with him a number of other high-ranking people in Hezbollah. Is that your sense, Connor?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I think we're starting to see the impact of these things too. It's been interesting. Again, this is something we talked about last week, but it's been interesting that there's been relatively muted rocket attacks coming from Lebanon back into Israel. And I think that that is potentially a signal that these attacks on the highest levels of Hezbollah are having a big effect. Though at the same time, we're also seeing some of the first casualties of Israeli soldiers as they come into, like, as they've actually invaded the south of Lebanon this week. And I think that's going to show where this, like, centralized part of Hezbollah is different than the decentralized part, right? Because
Right.
yeah, like, the people launching the rockets are by and large maybe more of that central part, but it's mostly these small distinct cells in southern Lebanon that they're going to be coming up against in actual fighting. They're going to be doing ambushes, classic insurgency stuff. And so it's going to be a difficult fight no matter how many leaders they kill.
Yeah, I had assumed the ground resistance would be less dependent on centralized control than
Yeah.
some other things, and God knows they've Israel's done a lot of damage to the centralized control, especially if this last strike was successful. So, as for when Israel will hit Iran, we just I guess the Jewish New Year just ended in Israel hours ago, and people think it could happen anytime after that. On the other hand, the Sabbath begins, uh, and Jonathan Shanzer of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, an organization that I would say has devoted much of its existence to getting us to a point where there could be a war with Iran. I don't think that's an exaggeration, honestly. I mean, it's not just a right-wing pro-Israel group. It's a right-wing pro-Israel group with a particular fixation on Iran, and they have always seemed to have good sources in the Israeli government. And he is predicting October 7th, which of course would be the anniversary of the Hamas attack, for the Israeli attack. I would certainly think no later than that. So I don't know, Andrew. What's your?
Well, I don't have a prediction about when Israel is going to retaliate in response to the Iranian ballistic missile strike that happened earlier this week. But maybe kind of, I do anticipate they will respond, although I don't think they have to. I don't think that they will lose face if they refrain from responding. But I guess just to kind of get into the lead item a little bit. I mean, some people are talking as if the Middle East is moving into a new and brighter era since Israel is like taking out all the bad guys from some people's perspective.
You mean people on kind of the Israel Hawk?
Right now, I'm thinking specifically of Douglas Murray, this thing that I just read in The Spectator. So he's like seeing them taking out all the Iranian-backed militants and saying, well, it's a good thing that Israel hasn't listened to the West. I imagine we're going to complicate that narrative greatly. But I guess I would highlight that Israel has scored some pretty significant and impressive tactical victories. I mean, as you were saying,
Absolutely.
took out much of the leadership of Hezbollah, including Nasrallah and the presumptive successor. I mean, possibly the presumptive successor. A lot of the middle manager types and even foot soldiers are either dead or wounded thanks to these booby-trapped communication devices. The group's communications are surely severely disrupted because of that. Military stockpiles belonging to Hezbollah have been taken out by Israeli airstrikes. And I would say Israel has really kind of restored the prestige of their intelligence services, which took a big hit after October 7th last year. So just kind of having all that in mind, I'd be curious when getting your take on all this to learn what you think the downside is of all of this for Israel and for the United States, its superpower backer. Because I think a lot of people are looking at events and just thinking, oh, well, Israel is just subduing its adversaries. But what do you guys think about that?
They are subduing their adversaries. I mean, I think the biggest danger for them is overreach, and they seem to uh, already be tending in that direction. I mean, look, this was like an earthquake when they killed Nasrallah and the whole thing,
Yeah.
beginning with the pagers, which at first I thought was just um, kind of they were just kind of showing off or something until they followed that up with the military assault and it all started to fit together. They have, they've, I think, destroyed a lot of Hezbollah's weaponry. Um, the piece in the Earthling is about the fact that Bibi is not. Biden may want to steer him toward an exit ramp, but he doesn't want one. They want to establish unequivocal dominance over all their adversaries and seriously degrade their capabilities. They want to leave Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, and for that matter, any militant Palestinians in the West Bank, including members of Hamas, enduringly intimidated and enduringly weakened. And I think the idea is that they have quite a ways to go before they feel they've accomplished that. That's why I don't think
Mhm.
there's. I mean, I don't. I mean, it may be true that. I mean, you're right. Israel doesn't really need to respond to Iran to save face because they are, they're riding high right now.
Right.
Nobody doubts their strength, but they want to degrade whatever capability they can. I mean, ultimately, I think they'd like to strike the nuclear facilities. I don't think they're going to do that this time. Uh,
Can I say, do they even have a capability of doing that without the US, like, being significantly involved?
Uh, I don't know the mechanics. I mean, I've been told that the US assistance would help. I'm sure they could do some damage. I mean the nuclear program has a lot of components. Some of them are underground, hard to reach. You'd need the bunker busters, which they have. I don't, which we gave them some time ago and they used in Lebanon already. Um,
Mm.
I don't know how much direct US help they'd need. I'm sure they could do a lot of damage on their own. Connor, do you have a sense for that?
Oh, of whether they could actually, yeah. I mean, again, we'll know when it happens, basically, right? If it happens, we'll get a sense for whether that's possible. But on the broader thing here, I think it's interesting because, like, I think there's never been any doubt that Israel's got the ability to have these extraordinary tactical successes, right? Israel's military has long been the most advanced, the most technical, the most sophisticated in the Middle East. Part of that is that U.S. law says it must be that way. Part of that is that Israel has among the best kind of defense production industries in the region, things like that. But the big question, right, is what strategic environment does this all happen in? What are the strategic goals here? That's a lot less clear for me. I'm having a really hard time figuring out exactly. I mean, and maybe that is what Israel's saying here is that, like, the strategy is that they just have to continue to attempt to reestablish deterrence with these enemies because they have this theory that they live in a region full of implacable enemies that will continue to attack them unless they get punched hard, and if they get punched hard enough, they'll stop. Um, this is the most direct testing of that theory we've gotten in quite a long time. So I guess we'll have more on that in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say I agree with you with what you said, but I am a little surprised at how quickly and severely, seemingly at least, they've been able to degrade Hezbollah's capabilities. Hezbollah has been thought of as like the main, like, most impressive, most prestigious, and capable militant group in the Middle East. I mean, even last week, before I dropped out and entered the black zone of or the Asheville disaster, I wanted to ask in Earthling Unplugged, like, why hasn't Hezbollah responded more vigorously to Israel ramping things up? I know that Hezbollah has lobbed a not insignificant number of rockets into Israel. It sounds like you have a better insight than I do into how this so-called limited ground incursion by Israel into southern Lebanon is going. I've had difficulty finding an answer to that. So maybe Hezbollah is kind of showing their might in that arena. But it's It is a little surprising. I mean, I know a few weeks ago on Earthling Unplugged, I was saying Israel will have much harder time against Hezbollah than they've had against Hamas because Hezbollah is a much more like well-equipped and battle-hardened and experienced and professionalized militant group. But it kind of seems like that's not the
Well, that
case the
was the
past few weeks.
conventional wisdom at that point. That's why, I mean, it's certainly true, as Connor said. Nobody's ever doubted the military superiority of Israel relative to its adversaries, even relative to its regional adversaries collectively, right? Nobody's ever
Mhm.
doubted that. But almost nobody expected them to cripple Hezbollah, at least in the near term, the way they have done it.
Mm.
Iran did not imagine themselves being in this position, I think, where their deterrent capability right now in this face off with Israel was largely limited to their arsenal and what they could do. They have invested a lot in building up Hezbollah's arsenal. And I gather that Israel, after decapitating Hezbollah, um, and also, I mean, I think the pagers were not nothing. I think a lot of people,
Mhm.
kind of mid-level managers and up, were uh, were taken out for some period of time, and also it just sowed doubt in using any form of communication, right? So, like with these guys who just got hit in Beirut, right? Apparently, reportedly, it was the Shura Council and they were all together physically. I would suspect that the reason they felt they had to get together physically is because they don't trust any electronic communications. I don't know, but anyway, they may all be gone now. And so I think the organization is kind of paralyzed. There are things they can do in a decentralized way, and I would imagine that ground resistance is one of them, and that's why, last count, 9 Israeli soldiers had died in 3 separate incidents on the battlefield. So it wasn't just one fluke, right? Um, and but they're hurting, and I think Israel took advantage of the opportunity to take out a a lot of infrastructure and a lot of Hezbollah's arsenal, and they feel completely unconstrained by civilian casualties. In fact,
Yeah.
if anything, that's a feature, not a bug, from their point of view. Now, what is this this doctrine or whatever that's
Yeah.
named after this suburb in Damascus, Connor?
Dahia.
Yeah, so
Dahlia?
it's
What
called the
it's
Dahia doctrine, or like
Dahia.
Dahia in Arabic. It's just named after the name of the suburb is suburb. It's not the world's most creative, but it's named after a doctrine that was invented by Gadi Eisenkot, who is the former chief of staff of the Israeli military. He's a member of the current war cabinet, or first articulated by him at least. And the idea is akin to population bombing, essentially. But Israel would argue that it is morally different because they first, asked civilians to flee these areas, and can come to the conclusion, whether or not that's true, that fighters are the only people left, and then go ahead and go through and destroy civilian infrastructure alongside military infrastructure based on 2 beliefs. The first being that the civilian infrastructure is fundamentally dual use and is being used by these militants and needs to be destroyed. And the second being that by destroying the civilian infrastructure, you will persuade the local population to rise up and to fight back and reject Hezbollah or Hamas or whichever thing. I think we've seen a lot of this, pretty much indisputably, in Gaza over the past year.
Mhm.
Extraordinary amounts of destruction of, standard civilian buildings, just demolitions of things like that. And we're starting to see a lot more of that now, actually returning to Dahia, the neighborhood in Beirut. So yeah, I think it's something that we're going to see more of for sure. Uh,
Isn't isn't that how Hezbollah was born, basically? I mean, I don't know if it was this particular neighborhood, but the idea was they were going in and going to places where the PLO was popular, in the early '80s, right? This Israeli war and Lebanon, and Hezbollah kinda grew out of that, and then in 2006, it seems like this sort of strategy didn't work because Hezbollah came out of that
yeah,
looking very prestigious and tough, but I don't know, it seems
Mm.
like there's not a history of this working.
Well,
yeah.
I don't know, Connor. What would you say to that?
I mean, working is a relative term, right? it's true that it has never caused that. Pretty much from my perspective, the history of population bombing has been a history of failure, right? There has not been a case in which population bombing eliminated an insurgency, and I don't expect to see any different here. But in Israel's point of view, the goal is shock and awe. The goal is destroying neighborhoods. And, this ties into because you've got this sense in which they hope that they rise up, but you've also got the side where it's like, screw them. They're essentially saying these people are essentially complicit in what Hezbollah is doing. They're essentially affiliated with this organization that Israel sees as a terrorist group. And so Israel sees itself as having the right to destroy the neighborhood. So it's almost a secondary consideration at that point from their point of view, whether or not it actually causes this uprising.
And I think there are things short of getting the population to rise up that Israel would say constitute a measure of success. If they can just make the population pissed off at Hezbollah because of the amount of dislocation and suffering, as in 2006, they feel, I think, that they can make Hezbollah more reluctant to start trouble with Israel. And I think that actually happened. After the 2006 war, Nasrallah, I gather, kind of half apologized at one point. He said publicly, look, if I'd known everything that was going to happen, I might have hesitated to kind of start this thing. And since 2006, that's 18 years of, I think, reasonably stable deterrence. I mean, things happened, but there has been no huge thing. And by the way, 2006, which was considered so big and lasted a month, was not as big as what's happened in 2 weeks in Lebanon. 1,000 Lebanese died in 2006. Lebanese health officials now say it's close to 2,000 in these 2 weeks. And, that was considered a huge deal. I think it was after that war that Tom Friedman, I think it was that and not some kind of comparably violent exchange with Hamas, when Tom Friedman said, look, what Israel just said to them is, we are willing to commit war crimes. Okay. And then he had to walk that back. Tom had to walk that back, both because it was less, there was less tolerance for saying things like that back then. Partly because it was less evident that Israel had committed war crimes than the last year has made it. And also the speech code was different. So he walked it back. But my point is, that's how big a deal this was. And that's how kind of appalled people were by the havoc wreaked by Israel. And now it's already killed twice as many Lebanese. I mean, it just seems to me like Israel is Bibi's riding high politically. I think he's finally gotten to a point where he could actually win an election, maybe. If they held one, it would at least be close for probably the first time over the last year. I mean, they're delighted with the killing of Nasrallah. And and I just think he's feeling his oats. And to get back to the strategic question, a lot of people are thinking he's going to overreach. I mean, some people think he already has, in the sense that he's, none of this helps Israel toward a long-term solution. But I think what one of you said earlier is true, is that Israel, a lot of people in Israel don't think there is a long-term solution. And you just have to keep, every time something happens, you have to hit them 10 times as hard as they hit you, kill 15 times as many people as they kill, and maintain deterrence. But now they're just doing that on a lot of fronts, including the West Bank. I mean, they did an airstrike with a fighter jet last night that killed 18 Palestinians. They didn't used to do airstrikes with fighter jets in the West Bank.
No, which is just, an airstrike in the West Bank it's hard to emphasize how alarming that. For anyone that's been in the West Bank, there's only small areas already that aren't under Israeli control. Often those will be these refugee camps that are essentially just buildings that still have rebar sticking out of the top of any given floor. They're made of simple cement or things like that, and they still have that rebar because they can't build out; they have to build up. And as new generations are born, they keep building up, and these are essentially just rickety old buildings with almost no code, nothing to really protect them in a lot of cases. And if a bomb hits one of those or comes close to one of those, it could go straight down. So the danger, and that was true in Gaza in a lot of cases, and that's part of why we've seen so much destruction there. So, like increasing attacks there is going to increase the number of civilian deaths pretty substantially.
Mhm.
Can we? I want to get back to Lebanon, and especially these recent reports that the U.S. wants to get involved in selecting the next Lebanese president, or kind of getting the Lebanese government to recover control of the entire country. But if we could talk about the Iran situation now, that'd be good, because to me that's the most worrying possibility of all this, because Iran and Israel definitely now seem to be on this like ladder of escalation. And as I said earlier, I do think that Israel could refrain from responding to the ballistic missile strike without losing face, just like they kind of did in April. As I remember, there was some kind of response after the April attack, but basically Israel kind of wanted to leave it there rather than mount a significant retaliation. And I think they can, and I hope they do take that
Mhm.
same path here. I mean, there's not that much difference between.
Andrew, I have bad news for you. They are not gonna take that path. And just quickly, this is one difference between now and then. Back then, they
Mm,
had to worry about Hezbollah mounting a very
mhm.
formidable assault if they attack Iran. They don't have to worry about that now, and they wanna seize the moment and wipe out Iranian, military infrastructure, and that's why I don't think they're gonna hit oil, tanks, both because they probably don't want to antagonize the entire world by raising oil prices, but because I think they're going to try to, degrade Iran's capacity to strike them as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean,
If
Sorry,
they
go
hit
ahead.
the oil facility if they hit the oil facilities, I would almost think that was intended to get Trump elected. I mean, that's what it would seem like to me, which you can imagine some sort of strategic rationale for them doing that. Man, yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I don't wanna be overly optimistic now, but I'm just saying, like, the last time something very similar happened, in April, Israel didn't lose face by just kind of leaving it there, and it's kind of the same situation. Iran clearly felt like they had to do something, and on this occasion, they had to do something more than they did last time, which is why they fired ballistic missiles and supposedly some hypersonic cruise missiles.
Mm.
So both of those types of weapons get to Israel much more quickly than the weapons like drones and
Do
stuff
we
that
know
they
they
fired last
have the
time.
do we know they have the hypersonic missiles?
not sure,
I didn't know that.
I'm not sure they do.
not clear.
Yeah.
But
But on the Iran oil thing, I mean, just to play the other side of it a little bit, like why would Israel shy away from attacking the essential backbone of the Iranian economy? Like, I get that it's the backbone of the global economy too, but if you're Israel and you have a military doctrine that says uh, extraordinary attacks create deterrence, extraordinary damage
Mhm.
creates deterrence, then why would you be inclined to avoid the thing that is going to have the biggest impact?
Um, because I just think they're feeling pretty confident. I mean, again, I think the only reason for them to need to feel they need to, establish deterrence is if they think Iran has a very formidable retaliatory capability, so I think they will focus on degrading that.
Hmm.
And again, I just think, I mean, apparently Biden came out today and signaled that he doesn't want them to attack the oil, facilities. So
He did he yesterday he did the anyway thing. This is like the telltale sign of like Biden has lost his train of thought, and
yeah,
he totally did it. He was saying, what was he saying? He was like, uh,
it
we're talking with the Israelis about striking oil facilities. I think maybe they can do that anyway. And
yeah,
then of course like the prices went up and everyone freaked out. And yeah, he did try to walk that back today.
yeah. I mean, the imbalance in power I mean, I don't want to exaggerate it. Iran has 3,000 ballistic missiles, and I want to talk later about like what kind of damage they might be able to do if this thing escalates. But it seems to me kind of the imbalance of power is sufficiently big that when people talk about a wider war, I mean, the word war almost to me doesn't seem to apply. It's like Israel can hit whatever they want, certainly in Lebanon, certainly in Gaza, I think pretty much in Iran. And Iran can, for a time, muster a kind of retaliatory response. Uh, but I think what they can afford to do is limited enough that it's just gonna be, almost like asymmetrical war. But I can imagine it going on a long time. Look, I think Bibi would love look, the cynical view of him has long been he'd love to get the US involved in a war with Iran. I don't doubt that. Um, and he would love to take out what he can of their nuclear facilities. And I think you're right to suggest that the more help he has from the US, the more of that he can do. Um, so, and I would guess that they will strike the nuclear facilities before the US election just because I don't see where the exit ramp is here. Iran has said very clearly they will retaliate if there's any Israeli retaliation, which there will be. And I don't see how Iran can back down. And I don't see how they can settle for doing less damage than they did this time. And I don't know where this stops.
Yeah.
I mean, there is an off ramp if Israel wanted it. I'm not saying they
Oh,
do
yeah,
want it,
sure.
but
They are in the
if
driver's
they
seat. Sure. They could
I mean,
end the
only
whole
a
thing.
couple
They didn't have to bomb Hezbollah or invade Lebanon to stop the missile attacks on northern Israel, which they claimed, because they knew that if they just stopped the war in Gaza, the missile attacks would stop. I mean, the ball's been, it's all been under their, Now, Bibi may
and
be under political constraints that complicate some of these decisions, but Israel as an actor had a lot of ways to go and still
I
does
mean,
have a lot of ways.
there's stuff the US could do to move toward an off ramp. Only a couple days before Nasrallah was killed, and those airstrikes also, as I understand, killed a top Iranian general.
Mhm.
But the Iran's new reformist president was like in New York reiterating that Iran wants to play a more constructive role in the world. I mean, he was using those words. We want to be a constructive international partner. He has still left open the door of negotiating Iran's nuclear program with the Americans. Some people thought that maybe he was going to have to turn away from his kind of reform-minded plans for Iran after Hania was assassinated in Tehran because that was such a humiliation for Iran. But he didn't. Like he's still making noises to suggest that Iran would be willing to enter into diplomacy with the US and kind of get off of this path toward war. But of course, the Biden administration has rejected that out of hand. They haven't taken that path, which is making this whole situation even more seeming kind of out of control.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
that
I
really
think
gets
Biden would
us.
have trouble. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say that really gets at what is so damaging to US interests about building our entire regional strategy around letting Israel do whatever it wants, right? Because you can imagine an alternate version where the US brings pressure to bear on Israel to pull back, where it uses its already extensive leverage on Iran to bring both of them to the table, where we find some kind of like actual stable setup in the region. We talk about this a little bit in the lead item of the Earthling, some sort of grand bargain at this moment of high drama, and it's not even that crazy. I mean, think about like for historical examples here, think about the U.S. and the Soviets in 1956 when Israel invades Egypt, goes all the way to uh, I think through Suez, like a huge distance, and they're reversed by the U.S. just saying, "Hey, what the hell was that?" And agreeing. And I think that we have the power to do that, and I think that that would potentially lead to a much more stable region. And so that really makes it so frustrating that our entire strategy is premised on again just letting a small state that has kind of negative relations with almost every other country in the region dictate every single aspect of our policy.
Well, even as late as the '80s, there was much more US resistance to Israeli policies that weren't deemed to be in the US interest.
Yeah.
It's gotten less and less common. And, part of it is that the domestic politics have changed. The pro-Israel forces have gotten better organized and more formidable, certainly since the '50s, when
Yeah.
Eisenhower just all he had to do was say, "Cut it out." And they're like, "Yes, sir." And you know, pretty much since the '80s, and then in the '90s, you have the famous scene where where Clinton comes out of a meeting with Bibi, supposedly steaming, saying, "Wait a second, which one of us is the superpower?" or something like that,
Yeah.
Um, but
But this, I kind of want to talk about this because it raises like the Biden administration has clearly been probably more accommodating of Israel and more unconditionally supportive than I can even imagine, like George W. Bush being. And I think in recent weeks, some reports have come out and some things have happened that have made it seem like maybe Biden's not making the decisions here, or there's some sort of factionalism within the Biden administration that is making the policy totally incoherent. I'm thinking, of course, of this Politico article that reported that there were White House aides that were talking to Israel behind the scenes saying, like, push ahead. We want you to go to Lebanon and take on Hezbollah. That was obviously in contradiction to what Biden was saying publicly. And the other thing I'm thinking of is that, again, the Biden administration came out with this ceasefire proposal that they said Israel had signed on to, this time a 21-day ceasefire proposal with Hezbollah. And almost immediately thereafter, in the days thereafter, Israel's statements and actions demonstrated that they actually weren't interested in honoring or pursuing such a ceasefire. Do you guys have any insight about what's going on there? Has Biden himself lost control? Is this all just kind of a ploy to make it seem like they don't support this when secretly they do behind the scenes?
I don't know, the guy who supposedly, or one of the two guys who supposedly privately told Israel that he thought invading Lebanon was actually a great idea is Brett McGurk, who is
Yeah.
the White House coordinator for Middle East policy. And he is, for people with, or kind of progressives and anybody kind of not right of center on, well, anybody who would, let's just say, agree with me on Israel. Um, uh, he's considered just kind of this malign force that has managed to inhabit administration after administration. I think this is his fourth consecutive administration. And, often the people who manage to stick around like that, like Dennis Ross, really are pro-Israel. And
Mhm.
I suspect he is, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's taking advantage of whatever Biden's current cognitive status is and whatever, attendant disarray there is in the administration or whatever, or laxness in the administration to push his own agenda. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't really think that Biden is opposed in particular to anything that's happening right now. If he felt emphatically that he was opposed, he's a lame duck president at this point, right? He's got nothing to lose. If he felt, and maybe there's an implicit thing around whether he has his full cognitive capacity here, but if he felt that this was truly a problem, that what Israel was doing was truly a problem, it would be really straightforward for him to use American leverage and to try to put a stop to it. But he's choosing not to. And so I suspect that he is totally on board with what's happening right now, or at least on board enough to not want to take any hits. But it's not like, you know what I mean? Like, he's not got political consequences to suffer anymore. He is not going to be the president in 6 months. It's over. So the fact that he's waiting now tells me that we must be seeing his personal preference.
But if he cares about the election, about Kamala Harris, or about Democratic control of Congress, he isn't quite a pure lame duck yet.
True.
I mean, it's after the election. Prime time, if he wants to punish Bibi, is between early November and late January. That's what Obama did.
Yeah.
Because Bibi had been such a dick, that he wanted to do something. And what we finally did was just not veto a Security Council resolution that Israel wanted us to veto. But even Obama, who had technically been a lame duck for 4 years, you could say, waited until after the election to do that one thing that they really that Israel really didn't like.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, the irony of all this is, I think that, yeah, and look, I do think Biden would have liked to end the Gaza war. I honestly do. I think he would have liked to have been the guy who ended the Gaza war back when it could have, when in principle, America, if it had been willing to use its leverage and he hadn't felt politically constrained, He could have probably brought the whole thing to an end, and we wouldn't be where we are today, and it wouldn't be spiraling out of control. I think he would have liked that, and I think the reason he didn't push Israel harder. Remember, they did try. They did do the one time they said, "Okay, we're suspending the weapons," and then AIPAC and everybody went nuts, and that was like the last time they said anything like that. But the irony is, he didn't stop this from getting to this point for fear of the political consequences, and now I think there's a very good chance this is going to defeat Kamala Harris. This is exactly what Trump wants, a world spiraling out of control.
Yeah. So what's the scenario where this directly affects Kamala? Is it that we continue to see kind of young people get frustrated with this? Is that U.S. troops get drawn in? Like what do we envision? What's kind of the specific way in which this screws Kamala over?
Just the more out of control the world seems, the better for Trump. He's not the incumbent.
Yeah.
Kamala is associated with the current administration. So it's like it's good for them that the longshoremen strike, apparently, I guess, is over. Like, if that was still going on in the election, that would be bad. Okay? Domestic and international disarray are just bad for the incumbent. And, and that's why, I mean, and Ukraine will probably be in bad shape and maybe unraveling itself. And look, you have the further complication that Bibi wants Trump to win.
Yeah.
And Bibi has a big say about when shit happens in the Middle East. So I
And Putin probably wants Trump to win too.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is definitely hitting this like World War III line a lot lately. So the more the world makes that rhetorical point salient, the better it's going to be for Trump. I would agree with that. And then I guess if you're looking, I mean, I think there's some poll came out that Arab American support for Trump or intention to vote for Trump is higher than you would normally see for Republicans, even though I think Muslim Americans used to be kind of a Republican constituency prior to George W. Bush. So people were worried that was happening. It seems like that is happening. Didn't some mayor of this like Muslim majority town recently come out with an endorsement for Trump?
Yeah, Trump visited him and smooth talked him. I don't know what that guy's thinking, but yeah, he did.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot more energy was pointed towards third-party candidates when it comes to that. I wrote a piece about kind of whether all this might affect Biden's chances back when it was Biden, yeah, you get the sense that the vast majority of people are more likely to be sitting out, which could be a big problem because the places in which they're sitting out are important. They're Michigan. They're certain. Even there are some in Pennsylvania, different places like that, right? So there's real potential for that to have an impact on the election. I'm less convinced that we're going to see a huge number of people voting for Trump, especially Muslim people who are very aware that Trump isn't a friend of Muslims, really.
Now, Connor, I have a question for you. It's actually both about American domestic politics and about Lebanon. But it has to do with the distinction between Arab Muslims and Arab Christians. I mean, not that either of those is a homogeneous group. And in fact, of course, in Lebanon, you have Sunni and Shia and Christians. But I wonder if the impact of this in Michigan may be overstated because although there are a lot of people of Arab descent there, a lot of them are Christians, right?
Right, sure.
And they're not. I mean, for example, with the specific case of Hezbollah, there are a lot of Lebanese Christians who are not at all enthusiastic about Hezbollah and may have celebrated the assassination of Nasrallah. I don't know, but what's your take either on Michigan or on Lebanon in light of that kind of distinction?
I mean, I think that people both in Michigan and in Lebanon view the current war as a war on Lebanon and not as a war on Hezbollah, right? And I think that's an important distinction. I think that the scale of destruction that we're seeing and the scale, I'm not saying that there's going to be some, I have no illusion that there's going to be some like united fighting force of the Lebanese military and Hezbollah and whatever Christian militias still exist. Those aren't going to unite and have some like effective battle with the IDF. That's not going to happen. But in terms of just like popular sentiment, people are mad at the IDF. The IDF is the one killing people, and I don't think that that's going to change. And people are mad at Israel, and so then people in the U.S. Are going to be understandably very mad at Israel. And I also think that a lot of the sectarian divisions that might play out in kind of more concrete ways within the region, within Palestine, for example, or within Lebanon, are very toned down once you come over to the US, because so much of it, it's not, people aren't actually arguing about like interpretations of religion. That's not why people argue. It's that there's these kinship relations. It's that there's these, uh, systems in which, Sunnis get goods from Sunni leaders, Shia, patronage systems. And when you get out of those patronage systems, you have much less reason to be kind of sectarian in your point of view, from the point of view of your material interests. So I think that like the block of Arab voters in the U.S., to the extent that they care about what's happening in the Middle East, are relatively homogenous.
Can we talk about the election a little bit? Actually, not just like how this is gonna impact the election, but like Trump versus Kamala Harris, like they're like what's going to happen in foreign policy depending on who's elected, because we've run some items in the Earthling in which we point to signs that a Kamala Harris administration would be relatively dovish, like relative not only to what Trump would be, but to how Biden has been. I think we've seen some. I mean, I think that the Harris campaign seems to be running kind of from the right or something. Like they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be more hawkish than Trump. I mean, there was this speech that Trump gave at some economic club of New York or whatever it's called, in which he was asked a question about sanctions. And he said, well, I was really tough about putting sanctions on, but it's important that you take them off. And I would take them off of Iran and Russia, once they serve their purpose. And then just last week, and this is amid these rumors that Iran wants to assassinate Trump, which he seems to believe are true. He's the one who's kind of announcing all of that. Apparently, the FBI has been telling the Trump campaign about this Iranian plot to kill Trump. And he's still saying that he would get back into the Iran nuclear deal if given a chance. Obviously, he's the one who blew the deal up in 2018. And one thing that I've been kind of disheartened to see is the Harris campaign is like hitting him for this, like for the sanctions comment. They're saying it shows how feckless he is. He's weak in the face of autocratic aggressors. And I don't know. I'm just wondering what you guys think about it. Also, there was some evidence of this in the JD Vance Tim Walz debate. They're hitting Vance for being opposed to aid for Ukraine, for not standing up to Putin. But what do you guys think about this? Do you think there's a chance that Harris would actually be worse on Russia, Ukraine, and on these Israel issues than Trump?
That's a hard one. That's a hard one. I mean, when you look at like the problem with Harris, I mean, the problem with both of them is that I don't think that either of them is particularly excited about foreign policy, right? Like, I don't think either Trump or Harris wakes up and says, "Yay, I want to deal with foreign policy today." That's just like not the thing that they think about most. It's not the thing that they run on necessarily. I think with Harris, we've, like you said, we've highlighted some people around her who are somewhat more dovish, but she's kind of locked into this, she has this sense, or her campaign at least has this sense, that being hawkish on the campaign trail pays. Whether or not that has anything to do with how she'd actually govern is unclear to me. Trump, the problem with him is more that he's erratic, right? The fact that a guy could say that he was going to do these maximum pressure sanctions on Iran the last time around, could say that he was going to kill a top Iranian general and then do it, could have all these things and at the same time reach out to North Korea for diplomacy. He's got this erratic kind of back and forth foreign policy. So it's inherently unpredictable, because I really don't think that he has some grand vision for how he wants the world to look.
No, but I think hawkishly pro-Israel is a unifying theme in his last presidency. I mean, he can say now while he's running for president, "Oh, I'd be a friend of Iran," but that's bullshit. I mean, he would be on Team Bibi for sure.
Yeah.
In some other areas, it's kind of less politically determined, I guess. I mean, what we had said, Andrew, in those issues of the Earthling when we saw hopeful signs in the Kamala campaign is, I think, still true. If you look at some of the personnel, Phil Gordon, who maybe would be National Security Advisor, Elon Goldenberg, who would probably be somewhere in the foreign policy team. They're probably better than corresponding people in the Biden administration, which I
Yeah.
just have an increasingly low opinion of. I mean,
Mhm.
the more I learn about Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken, but whoever, what in the end, political considerations matter, and that's what's prevailing now. I mean, I don't 100% get why Kamala thinks being so hawkish on Russia is a big winner, but part of the answer she gave us during that debate, she said to Trump something like, something about, not funding Ukraine or suggesting, and she said, "Oh, tell that to the 800,000 Polish American voters in Pennsylvania." And so, you know,
Hmm.
she's doing the math, and that must help explain that. The stuff she says on Israel is easier to understand. I mean, that's just standard American politics. Russia, Ukraine, I guess she has in mind a block of Eastern European voters.
Yeah,
And then there's just the default blob reflex in American politics. I don't know.
I wonder too if it fits into, Kamala's been really interesting in the way that she's run her campaign. There's been a lot of talk about how she's downplaying gender, right? So, like, when Hillary Clinton was running for president, she was really highlighting it. She was saying, like, I'm going to be the first woman president, break the glass ceiling, things like that. Kamala's almost trying to make everyone forget that she's a woman. And
Mhm.
one way to, perhaps shine a light on more masculine characteristics is to be super hawkish, because being super hawkish is associated with being super masculine. So it might be that she's trying to out masculine Trump in that sense. And I don't know. We'll see how it
I,
works.
I, I, I do think sometimes female politicians, I mean, first of all, Democrats historically have felt they had to sound hawkish because in the pre-Trump era, they were the ones being accused of being wimps and not being militaristic enough. But I also think women politicians sometimes feel that they have to sound as manly as possible in foreign policy.
I think this is the main dynamic that kind of liberates Trump to say these seemingly
Mhm.
dovish things about Iran. It's the Nixon goes to China dynamic. Like, it's because of Nixon's credibility as an anti-communist that he was able to pursue this like
Mhm,
détente
mhm.
with Red China. And similarly with Trump, I don't think he worries that he doesn't look tough enough, you know? So he can say, yeah, I would do a deal with Iran. He also has this thing about he makes deals with people.
Yeah.
And he has a very kind of personalized understanding of international politics. It's like him and these other leaders and getting along with them and doing deals with them and not letting them screw him over personally. Like, that's kind of his mindset. I think, do you guys want to move to overtime and
Oh,
maybe
I think
plug some
maybe
things
we've already
first?
moved there. It's
So the paywall.
but if not, if the paywall hasn't fallen, folks, it's falling now. Um, the um, yeah, I mean, I guess in case it hasn't fallen yet, we should invite anyone who's not a Nonzero Newsletter member to become one, and in that way gain access to all overtime segments of all podcasts and all paywall premium content, as we call it, I guess, in the Nonzero Newsletter.
We've been holding
Um,
back all the good stuff. Yeah.
yep. But sure, I want to. I do want to. I mean, we can get to the contents of the Earthling. I want to talk a little more about the surely kind of hardware side of the Iran-Israel thing, because, like, I'm just wondering how much capacity Iran has to continue this thing.
This was a free preview of Earthling Unplugged. To unlock the rest of this conversation and other exclusive audio content, become an NCN member at nonzero.substack.com.